I'm Jonathan Nicholson with ISP Supplies, and thank you all for joining us today. Today we're joined by Greg Lumen, Business Development Manager with Adtran. He put together a pretty comprehensive presentation to cover their OLT, ONT, fiber aggregation, and fiber extension products in detail, including their latest 10G combo PON OLT, the 48-port Adtran SDX 6330, which can support 9,000 subscribers in a compact 2.5 RU form factor. So it's pretty impressive technology. Adtran has also combined forces with ADVA to create a leading global scaled provider of end-to-end fiber networking solutions for communication service providers, enterprise, and government customers. With Adtran's industry-leading fiber access, fiber extension, and subscriber connectivity solutions, plus ADVA's global leadership in enterprise fiber access, fiber backhaul, and data center interconnectivity solutions, they can now offer a complete portfolio for providing homes and businesses with scalable, secure fiber connectivity, all fully managed by their Mosaic Cloud platform, which provides that needed end-to-end access and control, insights, optimization, and a lot more. So today we're going to concentrate on their fiber products. We will cover their wireless solutions in a future presentation. Please submit any questions you may have in our chat window, and we will answer them after the presentation. We will also be recording this presentation and posting it on our YouTube and social media. Now I will hand it over to Greg to get us started. Greg, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you, Jonathan. As mentioned, my name's Greg Lumen. I'm a business development manager here at Adtran, and in that role, I do a lot of sessions like this. Just real pleased to be here today, partnering up with ISP Supplies to talk about the product line and hopefully answer some of your questions today. So as Jonathan mentioned, we're going to jump into kind of what Adtran is doing in the carrier network space, particularly for broadband access. And we're going to talk a little bit about not only what's Adtran doing, but some of the trends that are going on in the industry that have become impactful and are really starting to shape not only what carriers are doing, but what vendors like Adtran are doing as we advance our product line. So before we get too deep into the product specifics, we'll go through a little bit, familiarize you a little bit with who Adtran is. So about us, who we are, what we do. We are one of the top 3 global suppliers of broadband access equipment. Adtran has been in the broadband access game since really our inception back in 1985. We got our start in Huntsville, Alabama, doing drop-in replacement cards for big muxes, and have since progressed aggressively across the telecom space. Today, we primarily, in terms of access technology, deliver fiber to the home, and that's definitely the technology that has the bulk of the industry's mind share today. It's definitely a great business to be in, and going through this transition from copper to fiber has been really interesting. So definitely do a lot of work there. We have roughly around 3,000 employees today. As I mentioned, our headquarters is in Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville is a very unique part of the United States, but not always thought of as kind of a tech corridor or a place where you would go to get telecommunications products. Huntsville is kind of a little Silicon Valley sitting right there in Alabama. There's a lot of high-tech industry that goes in there, and that's really one of the reasons that keeps us there in Huntsville. The amount of talent per acre is aggressively high, one of the top in the nation, more PhD and engineering candidates than most other places in the United States. That being said, we are a global company. We have operations around the world and customers around the world. Munich, Berlin, Greifswald, Germany, Sydney and Melbourne, Australia, Hong Kong, London. We do have locations and support customers on a global basis. That global effort, leads us to about 1.25 billion in revenue. Those are our numbers from 2022, and about 45% of that comes on an international basis. So Adtran has broken that $1 billion barrier, and it's a nice varied revenue stream. And that really is impactful on any corporation where you have kind of diversity of revenues, diversity of incomes, and it really helps you be consistent over the long haul. One thing we're definitely consistent in is we are an R&D, we're a technology-driven company. Not a ton of marketing flash. We do a lot of sessions like this with our partners, but we're plowing 21% of our revenue back into R&D on an ongoing basis. And that really drives our stack of products that we've developed over the years. Our R&D focus keeps us moving forward and keeps us abreast of the industries and the sectors that we participate in. We, on average, hold 60% more patents per dollar than our peers in the industry, and it's a kind of a testament to our research and development and technology efforts. So, a couple of factoids about Adtran there. We're going to have an opportunity here in a couple slides to invite you to come down for some sessions in Huntsville, and we'll jump into that here in just a few slides. If you've been watching the press, you may have heard that Adtran, we acquired a company called Adva, just kind of finalized that deal a few quarters ago, and really that brings together two product sets and two companies, actually very similar companies in terms of attitude and culture, but two very diverse product sets, both in the telecom space. But it really, when we merge these two companies together, we get a combined end-to-end networking solution, really focused on fiber, but that our customer base can leverage from one end of the network to the other. Whether it's a metro or regional transport solution you're looking for, something like DWDM, multi-degree ROADMs, Metro Ethernet form, qualified NIDs, or maybe you're in the residential broadband space, and that's definitely what we're going to talk about today. Our OLTs, our ONTs, the combo PON technology that we use to deliver residential broadband. We really feel that this end-to-end capability becomes more and more important as we move forward in time. And Adtran can be your single source supplier now for a very broad swipe across the network. Like I say, whether you're looking for aggregation and long haul transport, all the way down to managed Wi-Fi solutions in the home, or maybe it's a Wi-Fi solution in a business or an enterprise. We cover the gamut, and it's a very wide product line. But like I said, today we're just going to focus on our residential broadband piece. We are, for our customer base, in conjunction with ISP Supply, holding an event coming up here in Huntsville. And I'll have Jonathan kind of jump back in and fill us in on the details of what's going down here May 18th and 19th.
Great, thanks. Yes, we have on May 18th and 19th, we have our Fiber Friday Huntsville event. This is a complimentary 2-day comprehensive fiber training covering all aspects of a successful fiber deployment from head end all the way to the end user. We'll cover all the basic fundamentals all the way to construction as well as end user equipment. It's a pretty robust training and taking place at the Adtran headquarters in Huntsville. Once again, May 18th and 19th. For more details and to register, you can give us a call at 855-947-7776 or shoot us an email at fiber@ispsupplies.com. And we'll get you all the info you need and get you registered for the event. But it's definitely an event worth attending if you can make it.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. Another thing to note, you can grab the QR code that's down here in the lower right, And I've taken and kind of dispersed that QR code throughout the presentation because I didn't want to tell you about it and then do this, because you're not going to have much time to kind of snap that with your phone. So that Fiber Friday QR code will be popping up here in the right-hand corner as we cruise through these slides. So you can jump on there, snap that with your phone, hit the link, and I believe that takes you right to the registration page as well. So if you are mobile enabled, here's a way to exercise that camera and that QR code reader that everyone's getting used to using. I'm dating myself. I am from the 70s, and QR codes are a bit of a miracle in my mind. They're pretty cool. Anyways,
Oh yeah.
Fiber Friday, we invite you. Let's get down there and have a good time. Let's talk about some of the technology trends, though, that are driving the access network. Of course, the migration from copper to fiber, as I mentioned, that's been going strong for a number of years. And really, 5 years ago, we were talking about, hey, this is going to be the year we sell more fiber ports than copper ports. We've definitely crossed that gap. As we've moved from in the Adtran world, it was copper-based DSL products. Those were a core competency for a long time, and still a complementary product today. But really today it's all about fiber, and we're starting to go through another kind of technology evolution in the fiber space. We're migrating now from the GPON technology, gigabit passive optical networking, that we've used to really unlock a lot of bandwidth in fiber networks and distribute fiber to individual residential homes. We're starting to migrate away from that technology to the next upgrade, which is called XGS-PON. And we're just going to generically refer to that as 10 gig PON. If you have questions, need more details on what XGS-PON is, that Fiber Friday session would be great. Or you can drop us a line, hit up the guys at ISP Supply, and they can get you the info, or we can set up sessions. And I do a Fiber 101 session for a lot of customers, or we can get on a call and go over these technology details. But we're not going to get too deep into that. But one trend that we're seeing, though, around 2006, 2007 is when GPON, today's kind of current technology, really started getting launched. And we've deployed as an industry millions and millions of ports. What we're starting to see, though, is that there is definitely a need to upgrade our bandwidth, and we're moving to a 10 gig capable solution. And as I said, that's referred to as XGS-PON. It's 10 gig capable. The GPON networks that we've built up to this point have had 2.5 gigs down, 1.25 gigs up. They were asymmetrical. XGS-PON brings us into the 10 gig realm with a symmetrical 10 gig up and 10 gig down solution. That's definitely something that the industry needs. And 10 gig ports are starting to dominate. We are at that point now where we are starting to sell more 10 gig OLT ports than we are the legacy technologies, both GPON and EPON combined. Last year for Adtran is when we saw that tipping point. This year, 2023, is really when the tipping point is going to kick off for the entire industry. So you can kind of see our legacy GPON networks. We're going to be deploying less and less of that as we move forward. And the 10 gig volume is going to start to increase quite exponentially. One of the reasons for that is consumers, the folks that live in those residential homes that we build the fiber to, they use more and more bandwidth. ISPs and service providers see that every day. The consumer electronics industry, those companies out there, Samsung and LG, they make bigger, fancier TVs. You have companies like Meta, formerly Facebook, and Microsoft and Apple out there unlocking the secrets to virtual reality that really, if you look off in the distance, virtual reality is going to push a lot of bandwidth into the residential homes. Today, VR is kind of low res and low bandwidth, but where those big companies want to take it, it's going to be very significant as they work towards their ultimate end goals. Silicon manufacturers like Qualcomm, they make the chipsets that go into the VR headsets. Their roadmap for their chipset components, those individual chips are going to be able to consume 1, 2, and all the way up to 5 gig to get a fully immersive, completely rendered VR experience. And really, that's going to start happening in the next 4 or 5 years, where we're going to start to see, hey, we're going to go from having these kind of cartoonish models that we're looking at in goggles to something that is nearly indistinguishable from what we see as a high-res video game on monitors today. And the interesting thing about it, when you compact all of that technology into a set of glasses that you can put on your face, you don't have a whole lot of room for processing power. So the processing power needs to exist up in the cloud, and then the network that we're providing between that processing power in the cloud to the home, that network needs to grow, needs to be low latency, and needs to be able to move a lot of bits. And that's why fiber is the focus, and we're starting to see that tipping point occur where we're getting our next generation of fiber technology out there. Another big thing that's happening in the industry, not necessarily a technology marker, but an investment marker is happening right now. The era we're in, fiber coverage is exploding. Just in the US, the fiber to the prem, the addressable installed market is going to move from roughly 25.6 million homes passed to over 65 million homes. We're going to pass more US homes with fiber in the next 5 years than all previous years combined. So for just the deployment of fiber itself, and that's where service providers, ISPs like yourselves, you're doing that work. The funding is out there, whether it's federal, whether it's private, that investment is happening, and fiber is being deployed at a faster rate than ever right now. So that's kind of one of the big things that we need. We have more service providers serving more residential customers, and the technology is growing along with it. So with that in mind, we've got kind of a couple of polls set up here. And if you could take a minute, Jonathan's going to throw the poll up here, and we're going to ask you what your opinion is of some of these technologies. What's your technology strategy as we're moving forward?
All right. And what are your plans for 10 gig XGS PON? We'll give everybody a chance to answer.
And I don't know if I get to see this anywhere, Jonathan.
I think it just comes up for attendees, but it should be up right now. And actually, I don't think the polls are working right now. So we're going to have to skip over that. But just to read it for everybody, what are your plans for 10 gig XGS PON? Sticking with GPON for the foreseeable future, or building or deploying XGS PON already, or you're planning to move to XGS PON in the next 12 or more months?
Yeah, that's the kind of question we were hoping to ask.
Yep. Actually, you know what? Some results did come in here. It looks like it's a 50-50 between building or deploying XGS PON already and planning to move to XGS PON in the near future.
Yeah, and that's
like anyone's sticking with GPON.
Yep, that's very much reflective of what we're seeing across the industry as a whole. If I'd asked you that question 3 years ago, it'd be more like an 80-20. Those plans to move to 10 gig PON are really definitely starting to firm up, and we're seeing a ton of deployment right now. So the technology choices out there, and a lot of the marketing that's been done by service providers and really led by companies like Google, Comcast, some of the nationwide ISPs out there, is that speed is the #1 factor that the consumer cares about. While speed is necessary and it's important, that's not the only thing you want to be thinking about. So the drive towards 10 gig XGS-PON is absolutely all about increasing speeds that are available to our consumers. One thing we learned in the copper era is that consumers can obsolete technology very quickly when they get into things like MySpace and Facebook and YouTube and Netflix. Those nameplates in and of themselves obsoleted tens of thousands of ports of copper connectivity that the tier one carriers had. And it forced a lot of companies to move to fiber, and it forced a company called Google to actually get into the ISP business. Because the consumer segment of this equation is demanding more bandwidth, the technology that ISPs and companies like Adtran build, they need to be very robust. But you as an ISP, to attract that customer and more importantly, to keep that customer over the long term, speed it's necessary. You have to be able to deliver those video gaming experiences, the streaming experiences. Speed's a part of that, but it's really all about the experience that the customer has when they're dealing with your service. And what a lot of service providers in the industry have started to realize is that, hey, broadband subscribers interact with our service 24 hours a day almost. The only time it's not impacting their life is when they're sleeping. And really, you can't even say that anymore because we have a lot of customers, a lot of consumers. Alexa is the alarm clock that wakes them up in the morning. If Alexa's not working and the broadband's not working, it's going to be a rough experience. So it's all about the experience. And above and beyond kind of the hardware things like XGS-PON, there's a ton of software that goes into building up these networks and really creating an experience for your customer. Today, we've started in the home and we're doing a lot of software innovation for the consumer around Wi-Fi. And that really gives service providers a great way to connect with their customer and put the fact that, hey, you're using my broadband network. Here are some things that it's doing for you. Here's a speed test. We're blazing fast. We can start to overlay now additional services on top of just broadband connectivity. You know, things like digital security can be added. Things like great, rock solid, easy to manage Wi-Fi. And we're using software to start building up that experience base for service providers. Having that rock solid kind of fiber-based foundation is key, but the software is starting to play a bigger and bigger role in this work that we're doing as an industry. So whether it's on the consumer side, where you are extending that experience and creating different situations where you're saying, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, here's some things we're doing for you. Here's some things you can manage. Here's some troubleshooting tips that I can put on the screen of your phone for you. Or if we're thinking internally and how we're driving and managing our network, software becomes more and more important on a daily basis, especially as we start moving more bandwidth, connecting more customers. Service providers who start to have a very robust software background, operations software at their fingertips, they can extract more value out of the data that the network is generating. This is going to help you do your day-to-day tasks much faster, your moves, adds, changes, maintenance, upgrades, and really most importantly, your customer care. Having robust software driving the network, having a complement that you can put in your consumer's hands can really cut down that incident cycle when the customer calls in and says, hey, I have a question, or hey, X, Y, and Z isn't working. Having information at your fingertips and an end-to-end view of the network and how it's impacting the customer and then how the customer is also impacting the network, because it's a two-way street. And if you can really understand those kind of two angles of the relationship, you can really ramp up your customer care. So it's software that really starts to drive the network from both ends, from your operational side in the core, and then from the customer end in the home. We can start to enhance both ends of the equation here with robust software. So that's what our Mosaic family of software is all about. Mosaic Cloud Platform. 4 or 5 years ago, we would call this an NMS. And it's a piece of software that would live in our network. And yeah, we'd use it to upgrade all the fun network elements that are out here on the edge. Today, the software package is much more robust. Yes, it gives you all of those traditional capabilities that you've had. Hey, I want a piece of software that's going to let me know when this box is connected or disconnected. Or if I need to push software to these boxes over here, I want to be able to do that. We still have that at the core of the platform, but today we can do that a lot faster, a lot more elegantly, and we can actually automate it now to a high degree. So what Mosaic Cloud Platform does, it fills in that network management system role, but there's also a lot of intelligence here. And there are new ways now to connect our hardware operation to software solutions that are much more malleable and much more connectable to other parts of our business. So while we have our NMS functions that run very reliably at the center here, up at the top of the stack, we have a lot of flexible software connectivity. Things like RESTComp, solutions like Kafka that allow us to connect to third-party tools and northbound operating and billing systems, so we can start to really see what's going on with these network elements, and we can view and interact with that data in new ways now. And it's easier and more efficient to do than ever before. So we can really start to build an end-to-end access domain where we're monitoring, managing multiple different flavors of network elements. I now can have one single software platform that's going to run, say, a mix of access technologies like fiber and maybe fixed wireless. We have partnerships and other vendor solutions integrated right inside Mosaic Cloud Platform. CCS is a company that we've worked with to bring fixed wireless connectivity into the Mosaic Cloud Platform solution. So it's more than a one-trick pony. If you don't need all the bells and whistles and you don't need all the extra connectivity, you want to think about this as an NMS. It absolutely runs in that mode, but just know that you've got the most modern and up-to-date protocols. So this is a software package that can grow with your business over time. Whether it's something like a legacy network element that's using SNMP, or something more modern like the OLTs we'll look at that uses the netconf protocol, all the way up to CPE and IoT devices that use a protocol called MQTT. We now have the flexibility due to software platforms like Mosaic Cloud that can speak all of these new and modern protocols. In the past, we've really been restricted to, I use something like Corba or SNMP. And those were very bespoke, built for very specific reasons, for very specific pieces of equipment. Vendors didn't do a great job making sure that, hey, my SNMP works with the guy down the street's SNMP. There's a lot of stuff you can do with SNMP. We'll continue to use it well into the future. But new protocols like MQTT and netconf are really well governed as protocols and can be applied across vendor. So really, we're looking at software at Adtran from a vendor and protocol agnostic standpoint that's really going to allow our customers to grow and branch out and create kind of a better solution than we had in the past. It's not all about just having, hey, I'm an expert in vendor X. we all realize I need to be a vendor in experts, or I need to be an expert in vendor X, Y, and Z. And I want my software to be able to do some of the same things as my brain can do. And that's really where we're going in a very kind of open fashion. The other great thing that we're doing is in the past with an NMS, you kind of really didn't think about what the customer was doing. You thought about what your network hardware was doing. Today with our Mosaic 1 interface, which is part of the Adtran suite, we really kind of flipped that idea on its head. So instead of caring for my ONT or my OLT, we're going to think about our customer first. And we want a single portal and a single page where we can go and get all the information we need to care for that customer. So we have Mosaic 1, which is essentially our Adtran software front end that helps us organize the data that the customer and our network are generating. So when that customer calls in, you have a single place to go where you can search for that customer by first and last name, maybe use an address or a phone number. If you've got a MAC address for their ONT, you could find it that way too. So we're combining information sources, but giving you access to them in one particular place. So your customer care reps, your technical support representatives, they don't have to chase across multiple different screens and multiple different NMSs. We can start to aggregate all of that into our Mosaic 1 front end. And then we arrange the data a little bit differently depending on who you are in your business. If you're a CSR or a technical support rep, you might be in our care interface. You're probably going to have a customer on the phone when you jump in here, and you want to get to all the data you need to take care of that customer's problem in 10 seconds or less. If you're in operations, maybe you man the NOC, maybe you're a network engineer that doesn't talk to people. You are focused on the hardware. You want to see how that hardware is performing. You want to see what maintenance tasks need to be done. That's where our operation portal takes that same data, but presents it in a more meaningful way for that type of role. Very common interface is going to get you into that same view. And then you might have a sales or marketing application or teammates that they want to know, hey, the Johnsons, they're signed up for our platinum service and they're one of our heaviest users. What kind of promotions can I build for that type of subscriber? So it's one big lake of data, as we call it, but we can arrange it and give access to it kind of in different levels. And that's what Mosaic 1's all about. Our customers, our network, they come together, they generate a ton of data, and we really need to know what's going on there when we're working with them and when we're working with our network. So we have different views for different departments, but they all come in the same kind of common interface. So it's easy to use, easy to access, and built in ways that the humans that have to do this work start to understand, or I should say, can understand very easily. So this is an option for operating some of the hardware that we're going to look at. The software becomes key, but the underlying hardware, it's kind of like I said when I was talking about broadband speed. You have to have enough speed to satisfy the customer's needs. Your hardware, if it's not running, if it's not forward-looking, if it's not highly performant, it's going to let you down. You can have all the software in the world backing up your operations, but if you don't have a fast enough technology there to meet your customers' needs, you're still going to run into some roadblocks. So Adtran, we're jumping out ahead, looking into the future, and we've said, what are some of the things as we migrate from 2.5 gig PON to 10 gig PON? And then if we look out into the future, we've got 50 gig PON out there to think about. What does a network need to look like when customers are actually buying 10 gigs of bandwidth from us per port, per subscriber? What does that mean for a network? Can I do things the same way that I did in the past? And in Adtran's opinion, one of the biggest moves across all of technology has been the move kind of to what we call a disaggregated architecture. In the service provider space, we've had a lot of products that are a bent metal chassis, some Ethernet switches that are kind of custom made to fit right in that chassis, and then we'll build out to the right and to the left of that an array of different access technologies. And that model has served us very well. But as we start to look off into the future, say 2030, and we start to see, hey, we're going to multiply 10, the 10 gig that we're doing today, we're going to multiply that times 5 and bump that up to 50. And the next step that the specification groups are working on is actually 200 gig PON. We've got some time to get there, but what can we do today to make sure that we've built out an architecture that's going to serve us when we get to that 5x multiplier? That's what the disaggregated architecture is all about. Removing all of the artificial roadblocks or limitations, as I should say, of a chassis-based product. The bent metal chassis will never get any bigger. The switch modules or the Ethernet switches that are in these proprietary systems, they have to be built by an engineered Adtran or an engineered another access vendor. But that's the only place you'll ever use that Ethernet switch is plugged into that chassis. Does that actually make sense? When you start to take a look at what broadband networks look like at their core, it doesn't. Because a lot of the componentry that we need to really scale out a network, service providers are building, and they're pulling in multiple different technologies. So we can start to move away from this idea of I've got a proprietary chassis with a proprietary backplane, a set of proprietary Ethernet switches, and I can take advantage of what we've been doing really well as an industry for a number of years. As an ISP, you've got most likely a redundant set of core routers, or maybe this is an aggregation layer. These are Ethernet-based devices. A lot of different traffic runs through them. It's not just your broadband. It's your broadband. It's your management traffic. It's your backhaul traffic. It's your business class traffic. These core routers manage all sorts of different network traffic. There's really nothing proprietary about them. The vendors add little spins here and there, but at the end of the day, it's all Ethernet packets. In a lot of cases, then we have an aggregation layer that we put in front of our core routers. And today, these are oftentimes big 100 gig switches. Again, they're Ethernet switches. They don't care what kind of traffic comes into them. So this is the model that we really want to adopt. We want to take advantage of what service providers have already built or help them start to build architectures like this. And then south of this, that's where what we call a virtual OLT can come in. This doesn't all have to be wrapped in one vendor-specific chassis. We can break these things apart, and then that allows us to treat each layer in a very modular manner. I can upgrade my router as I need to. I can add aggregation as I need to. And then my OLTs, we're going to create a virtual Ethernet backplane, as opposed to the printed circuit board that a vendor like Adtran would put in a system. There's 100 gig ports on our OLT, there's 100 gig ports in our AG switches, and we can move forward. So our SDX OLTs, they don't go into a chassis. They are an autonomous piece of equipment that can plug into any AG switch, any Ethernet port. That creates a lot of flexibility, not only in terms of the technology we deploy. I've got 10 gig today, I've got GPON today. In the future, I'll have 50 gig PON. I may have some legacy technology that I want to plug into this stack of stuff. At the end of the day, these are Ethernet ports. It's an Ethernet virtual backplane, if you will. We can scale this backplane out in terms of distance. It can be N by feet, N by meters, or N by miles or kilometers. Just because I've drawn these things close together on the slide doesn't mean they're physically next to each other. That's the beauty of this disaggregated approach. In a bent metal chassis, My OLTs are all within 2 inches of each other. That doesn't always make sense. The speed of this virtual fiber backplane, it can grow. It can be N by 10 gig, N by 100. In the future, well, today, it can be N by 200. In the future, N by 400. We're getting to that point where N by 400 is going to be expensive, but realistic. So the scale here is tremendous. And this type of disaggregated architecture gives you some leading services scalability. You can build out extremely dense central offices where all of these components are physically close together. You know, we have deployments that exceed 100,000 subscribers now using a disaggregated architecture. But at the same time, we can address lower density areas where we're in a cabinet, for example, or we've got a remote or strand mount OLT that's just out there by itself, servicing maybe a couple hundred customers. So that's what the SDX OLTs that we'll look at here are all about. Leading services scalability, and then in the future, as that next technology comes on, we're just plugging into Ethernet switches. We don't have to worry about what did the Adtran engineer do to that backplane when he first invented it? How fast can he make it go? No, it's all Ethernet ports. Today, a lot of it's 100 and 200 gigs. Tomorrow, it'll be 400 and 800 gigs. Though that part of the solution scales with us over time, over distance, and over subscriber count. And you get a lot of great flexibility out of this solution. So one of the big technologies that we're putting into this disaggregated stack today is this concept of combo PON. This gives us the ability from a PON perspective now, since we are still transitioning from GPON to XGS-PON. As I told you, this will be the year that we sell more 10 gig capable ports than the 2.5 gig capable ports. But we have the capability, this is part of the PON standards. This allows us to now build a port that has both technologies on it. So my OLT, it's got all the intelligence it needs to deliver GPON and XGS-PON. The optic that I fill that OLT up with, it's got both, it can have both GPON and XGS-PON optics in it at the same time. When you do that, we call that combo PON. That then gives you the ability to deliver both technologies at the same time. This is a powerful brownfield upgrade for networks that have GPON. How am I going to get them over to XGS-PON without a whole lot of downtime? This is one way to do it. But for service providers that are rolling out brand new areas on brand new fiber, today you can take that single PON port, drive it across a single splitter, and you will have a GPON network and an XGS-PON network. So instead of thinking of this port as 10 gig symmetrical, there's actually 12.5 gigs in the downstream direction, because you can now choose based on the ONT that you deploy. This customer gets GPON, these two get XGS-PON. That adds additional bandwidth to the network that you're building today, which is going to add additional runtime for the technology that you deploy. We'll keep this kind of idea with us as we start to think about 50 gig PON out there in the future. But this has been one of the big game changers in the fiber to the prem industry, being able to have these two technologies simultaneously at the same time, running at different wavelengths and performing to their spec across the same piece of fiber, across the same splitter, and then servicing those networks. What a lot of service providers do with this technology, for example, we'll take all of our residential broadband customers and put them on XGS-PON, and then that will free up a bunch of bandwidth on their GPON wavelengths. And that's where they'll put their business customers then that want, say, dedicated service. I want 100 meg, I want 500 meg dedicated on all the time. Don't share it with anybody else. You can cordon off those higher level service level agreements to the GPON wavelengths and service them there, while allowing your residential broadband customers to tap into the 10 gig network. Some service providers go that way. Other service providers flip it. Residential customers stay on GPON, business customers go on XGS-PON. It's all about what business rules you think fit you best. There are no limitations to how you mix and match these technologies. It's a very powerful concept. So today at Adtran, the OLTs that will deliver these. This is our SDX 6330-48. This is a 2.5 RU tall building block for fiber to the home networks. Delivers 48 ports of combo OLT. So these 48 ports that are in the box here, we can do GPON, we can do XGS-PON, or we can do combo PON. Whatever we need in any of these SFP cages, we just populate them with the optic that we want to deploy at that moment. Huge uplinks. You've got 48 ports that can run 10 gigs apiece, 2 by 400 giggies, 2 by 100 giggy, and then 2 by 10 or 25 giggy. So consumers, subscribers aren't all using the same amount of bandwidth. We do have customers that are looking at this box and saying, my customers, I got a lot of customers, but they spend a lot of time outdoors. They might be doing a 20 or maybe a 50 giggy uplink. 100 gig, that's kind of soup du jour for today. So you got 200 gig ports, and then you've got another 2 400 gig ports that you can tap into over the lifespan of this box. All of our SDX OLTs are completely hardened. So you can deploy this in a central office, you can deploy it in a cabinet. They're ready to go, completely hardened. They're shallow depth, so they will fit in your typical telecom racks, in your typical telecom cabinets that you've deployed other equipment in. One of the great things about the 6330 with this single kind of 48 port building block architecture, we have best in class power efficiency. Power is becoming more and more expensive as networks grow. Service providers are looking at, hey, what is my per port cost for running a box that delivers 10 gig PON? The 6330-48, we ran some numbers for one customer compared to their legacy solution, and they were able to save roughly $15 a year per port on their deployment. When you multiply that by a couple hundred ports, that turns into real money real quick on a yearly basis. Power, being green, I like to think being green means I'm putting cash into my pocket, into my, preserving that revenue, turning it into profit. That's what power efficiency is all about. SDX is definitely there. If 48 ports is too dense, we have our 6320-16, 1.5 RUs, 16 ports of combo PON. Same idea, short depth, I-temp rated, ready to deploy anywhere. These are DC powered, by the way. Little different uplinks here. You got 4 by 100 gig and 4 by 10 gigs. So a different size building block to build with. The nice thing with these SDX OLTs is that they're literally Legos. As you go to build out your areas, these things can snap together very quickly, and they're easy to conceptualize when you're engineering a product, or excuse me, a project. So physically common footprint across all the different port sizes, and then you have the Mosaic Cloud Platform software that helps you bring them all together into one logical unit. So that's our 48 and 16 port OLTs. Got another one in the interest of time, our 6312-4. I won't go into a ton of details here, but completely sealed, 4 ports of up to combo PON, and then 4 by 10 gig uplinks. So this is for those lowest density areas where you need to get your equipment deeper into the network, but do it at a low price. Because essentially this is 4 ports of combo PON that comes with a cabinet wrapped around it. You can mount this on a 4x4 post that's installed in the right of way. If you have more questions on any of these, feel free to get a hold of the guys at ISP Supplies, and we'll bring you more technical detail. Finally, a bit of a roadmap item. We've got our 4 port sealed. We'll be doing a 4 port rack mount probably first half of 2024. So get you into some kind of different density situations across the lineup. So 48, 16, 4-port sealed, and then in the future 4-port rack mount. So with that, we're ready for our second poll, and then we'll take a quick look at ONTs and wrap things up.
All right. Our next poll is what is the most important feature for our fiber to the home ONT? Give everybody a few minutes to answer here. Hardened for outdoor installs, 2.5 gig or 10 gig ports with PoE capabilities.
Really interested to see what this audience says. Those are some tough choices.
Oh yeah.
Might not always be able to pick just one.
Well, it looks like the majority of everyone voted for PoE capability.
There we go. All right, let's take a quick look at the ONTs. I'm going to show you the top runners that Adtran is delivering, and then we'll talk a little bit about that PoE piece. So ONTs, you really got two flavors of PON out there. You got GPON, you got XGS PON. XGS top of mind for residential deployments today, so we'll start there. This is just a quick snapshot of the Adtran ONT portfolio. We have other models, but these right here are our top running XGS ONTs. We've got our 631Q, 2.5 gig Ethernet port on it. Very straightforward. We have our 631, 10 gig Ethernet port on it. Again, very straightforward. And then we have our SDX 632V. That's got the 10 gig port, a 2.5 gig port, and 2 VoIP ports. So what you get here is a landing place for your XGS PON, and then you get to decide, hey, am I going to drive more than 2.5 gigs? If I'm going to do that, if that's going to be in my product portfolio, then we're going to want to look at the 631 or the 632V that have that 10 gig port on it. If I'm only going to do 1 gig services or maybe 1.5 gig, then I might be deploying the 631Q with just the 2.5 gig port on it. So some kind of product differentiators there. And for an ONT, which is essentially a PON media converter, that really is what it comes down to. Where am I going to deploy this thing, and how much speed do I want to max out at? If you want to save a couple bucks, if you're not going to go to like a 5 gig package, maybe the 631Q is the right approach, and then you're going to save that money per ONT. If you have those 5 or 8 gig accounts, that's becoming more and more common. A lot of it's just competitive marketing amongst service providers, but kind of the race to 8 gig to 10 gig is definitely on in some markets. So if you need that up to 10 gig capability, you've got your 631s. And then for those of us that want voice, we enable voice on all of our ONTs using SIP, and that can be kind of thought of as over the top or integrated. You can establish a VLAN right across the OLT in your entire stack of network, and deliver SIP right to these 2 VoIP ports. And the 632V gives you kind of the most connectivity in a pure ONT. No routers, no Wi-Fi's here. These are just ONTs. You land them in the home, and really the idea here is they're set it and forget it. On the GPON side, we've got very much the same idea in our 600 series micro ONTs. These things are tiny. They fit in the palm of your hand. They're 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches roughly. We got 2 different variants on the screen. Our 611 second gen. This would be an up to 1 gig offering. So GPON in, 1 gig out. You can do over the top voice, hang an ATA off here, off of a switch or a residential gateway. But the idea is very small, very lightweight form factor to deliver up to gig services. We have a lot of customers that are in that situation where I have an exchange, I have a competitor that's delivering more than a gig, but I'm not quite ready to upgrade to XGS PON. What can you give me that will make me competitive until I get XGS PON out there? How can we ramp up GPON speeds? Now I'm going to tell you, SDX 611Q is a 2.5 gig port on it. It's GPON fed, And we generically call this at Adtran the idea of overspeed, where you're doing more than a gig on GPON. And we don't recommend that you do 2.5 gigs, but if you want to do a gig and a half, that starts to make sense, especially in those areas where a competitor has come in and said, hey, we're delivering more than a gig. 611Q is a very affordable strategy that can help someone who's deploying GPON in an area get into a gigabit plus solution. So what I'm not showing you ONT wise, we have outdoor ONTs for both XGS and GPON. We have some different port combinations. The guys at ISP Supplies, if you want more details, if you're looking for something specific, we can work together and get you more info, but we've only got a short amount of time and I'm using all of it. I apologize, Jonathan. So we'll keep the ONT conversation here kind of brief. One comment on PoE capabilities that is coming in the Adtran portfolio. It's not here today. Our indoor models, these all use a barrel connector. They'll plug into a wall wart. And we do have PoE designs that are being worked right now. I begged my product manager to let me show you some pictures and get you some more specs. But he basically wants the paint to dry a little bit more on their development effort. So hopefully kind of fourth quarter, maybe first quarter 2024, PoE powered ONTs will be something I can come back and show you all the specs on. But they're a roadmap item today. All right, so it's a huge conversation about hardware. I'm driving right to the top of the hour. Just want to remind you again, Fiber Friday coming up in Huntsville. This would be a great opportunity not only to get some fiber background, but come to Huntsville, spend some time with us. There'll be some Adtran experts there, and you'll be able to see more of the hardware, see the software in action as well.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be a lot of fun. We'll also get a tour of the facility. We're going to have a welcoming reception, a little happy hour as well, so that way you get to meet the team and learn a lot of good stuff about fiber. You know? So excellent overview. Thank you very much, Greg. We do have a few minutes that we can cover a couple of questions. A few questions did come in. One of them is regarding 50 gig PON. It says, I've read some info on 50 gig PON. Will 10 gig PON really last me for a while? If so, how long? Or should I wait for the 50 gig?
So should you wait for 50 gig PON? Kind of the timeline that we're seeing for 50 gig PON. It's really on an accelerated track. And we definitely plan to see 50 gig PON start to materialize. You're going to start hearing about it in next year, really in 2024. That's when you're going to hear of customers, hey, we're doing a proof of concept. We've got some Frankenstein ONTs. 2024, 25, that's what's going to be going on. You're going to hear that. You might hear of an Adtran customer that deploys a 50 gig port or two, but these are going to be done on ONTs that get built in lunchboxes, not something that is mass deployable. By the time we get to 2026, 27, that's when we want to be working with service providers who feel compelled to get there first and want to do some first field trials. Even by 2027, 2028, ONTs are not going to be cost optimized. You're really looking at out to like 2030, where 50 gig PON starts to become a solution that you can grab off the shelf and mass deploy, and it's kind of business as usual. 2030 is when we plan to see that. So if you as a service provider are in an exchange and have customers that are not challenging GPON, you don't have a competitor, one thing to pay close attention to is if you have an MSO in your area. MSOs are going through their DOCSIS revisions. DOCSIS 3.0, very capable. DOCSIS 3.1, definitely 1 gig capable, but DOCSIS 4.0 is right around the corner. And I would hate to see anyone get into an exchange, build it up, deploy a bunch of GPON ONTs, and then have the MSO go from 3.0 to 3.1, and then then you're going to be scrambling for something like that overspeed ONT. So you really got to look at your competitive landscape and the amount of bandwidth that the subscribers you're working with, the areas, if you're in rural northern Washington up in the mountains, those folks aren't going to use a lot of bandwidth. 100 megs up to 500 megs, GPON's going to be great. If you're in a suburb of Minneapolis, you have to have a gig, if not more today. And then you've got Comcast, you've got Charter in your backyard, and they are software upgrades away from going from DOCSIS 3.0 to DOCSIS 3.1 and eventually to 4.0. So it really depends on your competitive landscape and how comfortable you are if you want to entertain skipping XGS-PON.
Gotcha. Thank you. Another question came in about the TA5000. So it seems that the TA5000 has been around for some time. Do you recommend standardizing on the SDX only going forward? And is the TA5000 going away anytime soon?
So the TA5000, that's our flagship product at Adtran, has been for a long time and will actually remain that way in terms of volume for the next couple of years. The SDX is going to start to take that over. The key thing to remember with the TA5000, that is the battle-tested solution that's out there today. If you need to do something next week, TA5000 is what you should be thinking of. But you really need to pair the TA5000 with Mosaic Cloud Platform, because when you have Mosaic Cloud Platform up and running from an Adtran perspective, that is the superhighway that will get you into all of the subsequent releases of SDX OLTs and anything else we release in the future. The TA5000 runs in that environment and will be supported in that environment for a long time. As I mentioned, the TA5000 is not disaggregated. We're probably not going to do 50 gig PON in it. We can, it will do it, but it's going to be like a 4-port card. That cuts your density in that chassis in half, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So our approach is to help service providers bring on MCP, integrate their entire network into it, and at that point, when 50 gig becomes the need to have technology, it'll be an Adtran SDX OLT that they'll slide right next to a TA5000. The other great kind of next phase for the TA5000 is really starting to think about it. Hey, we've got a lot of capabilities in that box, and we've got a lot of great cards that aren't PON cards, like our 10 gig aggregation and carrier Ethernet card. So we have a lot of service providers that are saying, hey, when it comes time to move my 50 gig PON somewhere else, that's when I can look at that footprint that I have in my TA5000 that's being managed by MCP, and I can use it for 10 gig point-to-point services. So we think there's a very long life for the TA5000, but architecturally, it's that disaggregated architecture that we think is going to be best for service providers.
Great. Thank you, Greg. And that's pretty much all the time that we have to go over questions. There's one more question here, which I can actually take. It's how do I get more details on the SDX specs? For more information on the SDX 63330 or any other Adtran product that was covered today in today's presentation, please send us an email over to fiber@ispsupplies.com, and one of our members of our fiber team will be able to help you out with that information. So that's all the time that we have today. Thank you very much, Greg, for covering all that info. As previously mentioned, we will be uploading this presentation on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/ISPsupplies, as well as sharing it on our social media, specifically on Facebook. So make sure that you like us and follow us as well. We're at facebook.com/ISPsupplies. So thank you all for joining us today, and hope you have a great rest of your week. And until next time, everybody.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Jonathan.
Thanks, Greg. Take care.